This meeting will be conducted as a Zoom webinar to allow for public participation and comments. The Contra Costa Transportation Authority does not condone hate speech in any form. We continually strive to make life better for all members of our community and create an atmosphere where everyone feels a sense of safety and belonging. We ask that anyone who wishes to speak does so with civility, respect, and kindness for others. Public speakers will have up to 3 minutes to speak. The chair will call upon public speakers at the appropriate time. Each public speaker is requested to state their name and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Public speakers who wish to speak in person should submit a public speaker card to the clerk. Public speakers participating by Zoom who are wishing to speak should use the raise hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone. Written public comments received in accordance with the teleconferencing special notice on the meeting agenda will be provided to the members. If authors of any written correspondence would like to speak during the meeting, they should raise their hand or submit a public speaker card. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Emily, could you please conduct roll call?
Member Baker,
Present.
Member Miller,
Present.
Member Pace,
Present.
Member Saunders,
Here.
Member Shakaran,
Here.
Member Vedantam,
Present.
Member Wayne, Vice Chair Essel Sego,
Present.
Chair Lovejoy.
Present.
Okay, we do have a quorum with members Ash, Carr, Erickson, Everidge, James, Patel, and Stark absent.
Thank you, Emily. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone wishing to speak during public comment on an item that is not part of the agenda? If so, please submit a public speaker card or raise your virtual hand, and staff or I will call upon you. Emily, have we received any written or remote public comment?
We have no public comment, written or virtual.
So the next item on the agenda is the consent calendar, which includes a summary of actions from the April 22nd meeting and acknowledgement of the member attendance log. Are there any changes or comments from the committee? And I see nodding of heads, no.
Looks good.
Is there anyone wishing to speak during public comment on an item that is not part of the agenda? Is there any written or remote public comment, Emily?
We have no public comments, written or virtual.
Okay. So do I have a motion to pass the consent calendar for April 22nd?
I'll move that they be approved as is.
Okay, that's Member Miller for the first. And I'll go ahead and make a second motion. So Lovejoy. Emily, could you please conduct a roll call vote?
Member Baker,
Abstain.
Member Miller,
Approve. Yeah, aye.
Member Pace,
Yes.
Member Saunders,
Aye.
Member Shakaran,
Aye.
Member Vedantam,
Aye.
Member Wayne,
Aye.
Vice Chair Essel Sego,
Aye.
Chair Lovejoy.
Aye.
Aye, motion passes unanimously with Member Bankert abstaining and members Ash, Carr, Erickson, Everidge, James, Patel, Stark absent.
All right, we'll now move to the regular agenda items, of which we have 3. The first is an informational item that will be presented by Matt Kelly and Catherine Thibault.
Thank you, Chair Lovejoy. Good evening, Citizens Advisory Committee members. Matt Kelly, Director of Planning here at CCTA. I'm joined by my consultant from Mott McDonald, Catherine Thibault next to me, and Ashley Wong behind me, who helped us with this project. And there's the camera. We are here to present the community-based transportation plan for Contra Costa County. Happy to be at the nearing the completion of this effort, which has been about the last year and a half. We're excited to share with you the process and the recommendations that came out of the community-based transportation plan. And I think I'm just going to walk you through the first couple of slides here. This is what we're going to talk about today, some background on, what is a community-based transportation plan, what are the goals, the process we went through, talk about the areas of the county we looked at, the engagement, the project list we came up with, and what's next. So just an overview of the community-based transportation plans. These are, this is a different type of planning process. It's really grassroots. It's not supposed to come from staff at CCTA or staff at local agencies. It's supposed to be based on information we've received from the public, especially in certain communities. So really, it's a grassroots approach to addressing transportation issues that face low-income communities in Contra Costa County and around the Bay Area. MTC does fund these CBTPs in all 9 counties. They are intended to bring local residents, our community-based organizations, and transportation agencies such as CCTA and our local transit providers together in the same room to improve mobility options for low-income communities. So these plans really identify the most important transportation gaps and challenges that people in these neighborhoods experience on a daily basis, and develop strategies or projects to overcome these challenges. So just some very, very obvious kind of challenges that are identified through our outreach, as things like no lighting on my sidewalk while walking, to the store, cracked sidewalks while I'm walking my dog or walking to the bus stop, no bike facilities, so it just feels unsafe to get around on a bike, or transit is limited where I live, either doesn't reach me or the hours are limited. So these are the types of issues we hear about. You'll hear about other types of issues, but these are what we hear over and over again, and that's why this really doesn't fit into the normal planning process. Cities don't necessarily prioritize fixing sidewalks or increasing the lighting. They're just not priority projects for cities. So really, the CBTP process can elevate these types of projects and improvements. The CBTP kind of fits into our countywide planning process. So we prepare a countywide community-based transportation plan that built on top of our previous plans, which were adopted about 5 years ago. The recommendations from these plans then feed into our countywide transportation plan, which is our kind of 25-year visionary document, which will be presented immediately after this item. So there's a logical progression to tonight's presentations. The CBTPs, however, are kind of focus on shorter term, those low-hanging fruit types of projects that I just mentioned. There are also some longer term projects identified in there, and those are projects that the countywide plan can kind of highlight because they are longer term in that more 25-year time frame. So the process for this CTP, we started last spring. We began by kind of defining the project area, which Catherine will talk about in a moment, identifying the existing conditions. So what's changed since 2020, 2021 when we last prepared CBTPs. Then starting in the summer, we started our engagement in the community, and that went throughout. We had several phases that Catherine will talk about, both virtual and in person. And then this past winter, we evaluated the projects that were identified, and now we're working on finalizing the CBTP, which is why we're here tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to really walk us through the process.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Catherine Thibault. I'm a senior project manager for Mott MacDonald in transportation planning and social outcomes. So as Matt mentioned, part of our first order of business as we initiated this CBTP process was to identify our communities of focus using MTC's methodology as described in its equity framework. So those are the communities that you see identified on the map here are communities where we see higher concentrations of people who typically face more barriers to mobility and who may have some specific needs and priorities when it comes to moving around. And it was really the focus of our activities. The regions that you see highlighted are slightly different than the ones that were identified in 2020, just as population changes over time. So as you'll see in the draft report, you'll see the difference in how the drawing of the map have changed from the preliminary version, the 2020 version, to this one. So a quick snapshot of the characteristics of those communities. So it's comprised of 24% of the county population. They're mostly concentrated in East and West County, which also explains why when you look at the list of projects that was proposed, there's a much larger volume of projects in those two areas. But there's also some smaller pockets in Central and South County, which we wanted to look at and take into account. It has a higher proportion of Black, African American, as well as multi-racial populations. And overall, the household income in those communities is slightly lower than the countywide median. And there's also a much higher proportion of residents in those areas who live below 200% of the federal poverty level. There's also a slightly higher share of individuals with disabilities, both physical and cognitive, in those areas. And then one interesting component is compared to the countywide numbers, there's also a lot less of community members in those areas who work from home, which suggests that maybe a higher concentration of these individuals either are in the essential industry or don't have as much the same ability to change their mobility choices, to adapt to different circumstances because of the nature of their work. There's also higher reliance on public transit and slightly lower proportion of vehicle access. So as Matt mentioned, this is a grassroots project, so the community engagement was really intentional. We wanted to have representation from the 4 sub-region, and we wanted to give different options, different opportunities for people to come talk to us about their needs and priorities. So over the course of the year, we had a variety of engagement activities, starting with quarterly meeting with a steering committee, including members of transit agencies in the area, as well as representative of different nonprofit or people who work directly with those priority communities. We also went in and had participated in community events in each of the 4 sub-regions, trying to talk directly with folks about what their mobility needs were, what their travel experience were, what they were hoping to improve mobility in their community. We had an online survey which was held over the course of 2 months in the fall of 2025. As well as 2 virtual town halls, one which was back in December, where we used this as an opportunity to validate what we heard throughout the community events and the survey and make sure that we had it right, and then also give another opportunity to chime in and identify projects and needs. And then the last one was just a month ago in May, where we presented the initial list of projects described the process on how we created the project list and evaluated, and then gave people an opportunity to react and respond. So overall, we reached over 400 people throughout those different activities, and there was a good representation across the 4 regions. So when we put all together what we heard during those activities, it was really loud and clear. We heard the need for higher transit frequency and reliability of the service, better connection between those regional transit stations and the downtown and the areas and the key destinations throughout those communities. We also heard the need for pedestrian and bike improvement, either expanding on the existing network to bridge some gaps within the network, but also address some maintenance issues that were observed, especially with sidewalks. And then ultimately, there was also a priority related to traffic calming and improving safety, and specifically for our more vulnerable users of the road, including older adults and youth. So we put it all together, but we also were trying to, as much as possible, get a glimpse of what the needs were in each of the individual subregions. So when we were going through all the feedbacks and the comments, we were also trying to identify what were the specific needs of those communities, so that as we identify our projects, then we could have a more targeted approach. And this is one of the things that differentiate this plan from the previous one, which had 4 independent CBTPs. So this time around, we're looking at, yes, all 4 of the subregion independently, but we're also trying to identify common trends that could benefit from a countywide approach. So we use these feedbacks and those comments to build our project lists. And so considering all the needs and priorities that were identified, and the nature of the plan, we focused on projects that really were focused on traffic calming, bicycle and pedestrian improvements, improving access to transit amenities, so first last mile improvement, as well as transit service improvement and transit stop amenities. We made sure there were distribution of projects across all the 4 subregions, but also countywide. And we used a variety of sources to build our project list. So what we heard from community events, wherever there were folks who brought up specific projects that they would like to see realized in their community. The survey also had some open-ended questions, so giving the opportunity for folks to provide input. Same for the town hall. We wanted some continuity between the 2020 CBTPs and this one, so we looked at the projects that were identified then and that had not been implemented still at this time, and we reviewed them and looked whether they were still relevant considering the needs that we'd heard. And we also pulled from CCTA's congestion management plan. So that gave us a list of over hundreds of projects that we then had to evaluate and prioritize, which was a bit of a challenge because a lot of those projects vary in nature and scale. Some of the projects that we heard from the community were really high level versus others that were really, really specific. So we had to try to categorize and break them down into different lists. So for each sub-region, then we broke the project down into 3 sub-lists. So first of which is the programs, plans, and policies. Those were not scored, but those were identified as programs and efforts that would be supportive of the overall priorities that were identified. Then we have short-term projects. So those are projects that would be quick build, quick wins in those communities, things that could be implemented in less than 5 years, where there's been already a substantial amount of work that's been done already, and so that could be ready to go in a fairly short manner. And then we have the longer-term projects, which would take over 5 years, projects that are maybe a little wider in scale, that would require potentially coordination between multiple jurisdictions, or that would be a little more complex from a technical standpoint. We use 4 different criteria to do the scoring, and I want to emphasize we did not eliminate any projects from the list, but we just try to organize them in order of priority to see which one we should try to tackle on. So those are criteria that were also used in the previous CBTP that we somewhat adjusted just to be more reflective of how the priorities have changed over the last few years. So first we have safety, so looking at how well a project would support the need, how well a project would improve conditions to make it safer for people to walk, bike, or use public transit. We also looked at the project location and whether it was located along corridors where we've observed high concentrations of collisions over the last few years. We have accessibility, so identifying all the key destinations in our different regions and assessing how well a project would help to make getting to those destinations easier. Also looking at connections between modes and trying to make those connections between the transit routes, but also between one mode of transportation to another easier. Those were really the key priorities that were identified by the community, but we still wanted to also identify or have community priority as a criteria of its own. And so whenever we heard a theme or an idea come up over and over throughout different engagement activity, we wanted to really take that into account in our scoring to see that this is really something that we've heard on the ground and that needs to be addressed. And then finally, implementation readiness, whether there's funding that's already been secured or the technical complexity, the initial design that's been completed, the stage of the project, and how ready for implementation the project would be. So as you saw in your packet, it's over hundreds of projects that were identified, so we won't have the opportunity to go through all of them, but this shows the top ranking projects in all of the 4 regions, but also countywide. It shows you how varied the projects are, how specific they can be to the different locations, and ultimately how it provides this comprehensive picture of what strategies we should focus on to improve mobility in our 4 communities of focus. And then I'll pass it back to Matt to talk about implementation. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Just want to remind you that that project list is in your packet. So feel free to peruse that while we're talking. And if you have any questions, you can let us know. But I just wanted to give you an idea of what the next steps are and really how these projects could be implemented. So the first next step is really, as part of the CTP is to kind of incorporate the recommendations from the CBTPs into the CTP. And our CTP is, as you'll find out a little later, is financially unconstrained. So a lot of these projects, or most of these projects were part of that long list anyways, especially projects that have been on the books for a little while. And as Catherine mentioned, a lot of these projects were identified back in 2021, 2020 and 2021 with the last plans. We did, as she mentioned, make sure that those recommendations that came out kind of during the COVID era, are still relevant today, and most of them were just because of the nature of the types of improvements that were identified. We don't want this plan to sit on a shelf. We want it to be implemented. So we think in terms of funding, funding is usually the biggest barrier to implementation, because especially if these projects are not prioritized by the cities, if funding can come from elsewhere, that kind of prioritizes them automatically. So CCTA is getting ready to release a large grant funding opportunity, a call for projects that's coordinated amongst several funding sources, including MTC's One Bay Area Grants, Cycle 4, which includes a funding source called CARE, and that stands for Community Action and Regional Empowerment. I always have a hard time with that one. That is a new acronym, and that is a new funding source that is, it replaced the old Lifeline Transportation Program. If you've been around for a while, you might have heard of Lifeline. That was a dedicated source to funding CBTP project implementation. So now CARE has replaced that. So we, as part of our call for projects, we will be looking for projects named in CBTPs to fund from that dedicated source. So we hope to at least fund a project or two out of the CBTP from this round of CARE funding. However, there is also the Measure J Transportation for Livable Communities that is part of this call for projects, and that is a competitive funding source that all of our local jurisdictions can apply for. Certainly, most all CBTP projects would be eligible for that. The only things that aren't really eligible would be something like a road widening, but we didn't identify any of those. TLC is mainly for, bicycle, pedestrian, and transit type improvements. So we're hopeful that some of our local jurisdictions will choose to apply projects from the CBTPs for that competitive fund source. But as I mentioned, a lot of these projects don't always, they aren't always prioritized at the same level by the cities. So we encourage those who participated in the CBTP process to, reach out to their local jurisdictions where projects have been identified and let those jurisdictions know, their staff know that there is support behind funding and implementing these projects. So we've let city staff know that they should be, listening for those comments from their local residents and advocates. Then the biggest funding source of all, but something a few years down the line, is the TEP, which you're also going to be hearing about, the Transportation Expenditure Plan. That is the third item on our agenda tonight. That would result in a new sales tax measure, which would be, a huge infusion of funding to the county, which could fund a variety of projects and could even have specific funding set aside for CBTPs. So those are the potential sources of funding in kind of the near to medium term. Also, the last bullet is really CCTA supporting local agencies in their implementation of CBTP projects. And that's both through the funding opportunities and for assisting them in their grant applications to other fund sources. Naming a CBTP project in most any grant application generally results in some additional points in the scoring rubric. So the county has been very active in applying for projects named in CBTPs, and they've been successful in getting those funded through other funding opportunities. So what's next? We are going to be presenting the draft to CBTP to our planning committee next week. And as you might have noticed, we included the executive summary and the project list in your packet. The full draft is now been posted as part of the planning committee packet. So if you are interested in seeing the entire report, the entire plan, please go to the PC committee meeting for the 4th, and you can click on the full plan there. But the executive summary does provide a pretty good summary, and the project list is really the meat of the plan. So we'll be presenting that to our board, and then we'll have about 30 days of public comment available. So if there is any comment does come in through those presentations, we can incorporate that into the final plan, which we think will be completed and adopted by this fall. So that is our presentation today. We can certainly take any questions you have.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. It's great to have more of a forward-looking and planning overview from our Director of Planning and Catherine from Mott. So, you know, it's nice to have the time and space to be able to do that. I'm sure we have some questions. Member Miller?
Yeah, I've had something burning a hole in my head here to ask, and that is, since these are aimed at certain communities of need, one of the questions I had is that there's been a emergent requirements from the state about like curb cuts for streets and stuff like that. And I know that a lot of cities have viewed this as an unfunded mandate, but is it incorrect for me to perceive this as a potential thing to bring up with municipal leaders about means by which they could apply for some sort of grants in that vein?
Yeah, so I think that was one of the primary countywide recommendations we had, was to kind of a wholesale ADA compliance for the county. So, you know, that's not one project that anyone can take on.
Right.
However, you know, I think individual cities could apply for, you know, a citywide program.
Right.
And, you know, that would fall under that recommendation. So, you know,
Yeah.
if a city was interested in applying as part of TLC or something like that, that would certainly.
I think that's exactly what I was hoping you might say. And then the other thing I was going to say is I was a little, I know this is just sort of the summary, but it did appear that the Central County projects kind of only landed in two places, which were the county seat, Martinez, and the Monument Corridor. And maybe that's just based on the populations, and that's fine, but anyway, it was just something I noted.
Yeah, the Monument Corridor and downtown Martinez are the primary equity priority communities in Central County, so that is where we focused most of our outreach.
Thank you. Member Saunders?
So I think I get why we're doing this and kind of makes sense. What kind of got done off the prior list? I mean, does anything happen, or, you know, what are the results? So if there were 100 projects, did 5 get done, 50 get done? I mean, what kind of track record is there historically with this process and, you know, providing funding?
Yeah, that was actually a discussion we had with the steering committee, where we built tables and we tracked all the projects from the previous CBTPs and their status. And so I think potentially we can share that. And, you know, sometimes it's just COVID happened and then lack of funding or resources, a variety of reasons. But we could definitely share that information if you're interested. I don't know off the top of my head, though.
Yeah, we did identify some projects that had been implemented, but there was still a long list of others that are waiting. Yeah, I mean, I would say it's not the perfect tool, but it is one of the only tools we have for really hearing from these communities and trying to prioritize projects that could affect these challenges and gaps in the transportation system that were identified. So, yeah, you know, the CARE funding source is not large. It can chip away at that list. But without this, I think, you know, very few of these projects, I think, would get funded on their own.
Member Shakirin?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have one question. I noticed on the map, unless I missed it, that the southwest county region did not have any projects or any kind of a recommendations as far as all these, safety projects, access projects. Were they involved heavily or were they not involved or interested? That's the La Morinda, I guess you would call it.
Yeah, so La Morinda did not have any of the populations that we are, that fit into the CBTP definition. So we started with MTZ's equity priority communities, and there were actually none in all of Southwest County, include La Morinda or San Ramon Valley. However, the Mott McDonald team, one of our initial tasks was to look and see if there were populations that fit the demographic criteria of the equity priority communities. And the reason areas may not have qualified through MTC's criteria is because they're looking at census tracts. So it's kind of it's a large population. So you have to have a lot of people to qualify. So we decided to look at smaller areas and see if you had the same demographics pop up. And we talked to county staff because it was mostly in unincorporated areas. And they talked to us about a few areas they thought might meet the characteristics. So when we did that, we did find some populations in San Ramon, kind of near Doherty Valley, that because of either the demographics, the income, the vehicle ownership. So that's why we did an event down in San Ramon. And there are some recommendations for down there, but really nothing in the La Morinda
Okay,
area.
that's right, yeah, because I was comparing the two. I thought it was similar, but it's not.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Salcedo?
Thank you for the presentation. I guess kind of following up on that question. Since this effort expands like beyond the prior area-specific CBTPs into a countywide framework, how is implementation responsibilities being coordinated among the different cities?
That's the hard part. So, like I said, these projects aren't always on the city's radar. They aren't on their priority list generally, just because of the way they get identified. There isn't what I'd call an implementation plan. I mean, there's an implementation strategy, but there isn't a really good way to implement these on a wholesale basis. It really is project by project. And really what it takes is the community working with their cities, working with the transportation agencies, to really try and identify these projects and come up with, project supporters, that are really going to urge the cities to try and implement them, because, it really has been a struggle to get a lot of these projects prioritized. So our goal of each of these plans is to further that level of priority and implementation. I'll let Catherine weigh in.
Yeah, and one of the comment or feedback that we got in our last town hall was to identify those jurisdictions where those projects took place. So that's one change that you'll see in the updated version that's presented to the planning committee, where on the project list, we've added those jurisdictions. So it's a bit of a nudge and a call to action, and potentially will create opportunities for coordination between the multiple jurisdictions that are involved.
Member Carr?
I don't think this is a new question, but maybe it reinforces something Member Saunders already put on the table, which might have some value. So thanks for the presentation. the look-back process. So what percentage of these projects in 2021 were done? Was it half? Was it 80%? Was it 10%? If it was 10, we've probably disappointed a lot of people. If it's 50, so what were those that got done and why did they get done? And can we find mechanisms to get the more projects done? It's just really learning from our experience, and I very much connected. I'm not looking for details, just kind of the big picture as to, was it successful? What kinds of projects were successful? What kinds weren't? And how do we do it? How do we learn from the first round to make this next round even better? So just to maybe amplify Member Saunders, because I thought it was a great question.
I will say it is less than 50%. So probably somewhere in that 10 to 50% range, but probably closer to 10.
It's because you're dependent upon the municipalities to approach, or community organizations or whatever to approach for those grants. So you could put the money out there and whatnot, but it's still dependent on a pull from the other side. And do you see that as the limiting catalyst in the reaction, or what do you see as the barrier? Perhaps is a better question.
I think in general, Catherine may have some insight here, but I think in general, it's funding. There's very little funding available, as I said, for the, in the CARE fund that's dedicated to CBTPs. Beyond that, there's funding sources out there, but usually those fund sources are identified for other higher priority projects. So with the limited funding that's available out there through grants, it's not being directed towards a lot of these projects, unfortunately.
Okay, one final question that might kind of segue into the CTP. So there were, I think, 98 projects identified here, and roughly 100. So out of all the projects CCTA has on their list of to-dos, what is the total number of projects?
The total number just in the CBTP, or?
No, so this is
Overall.
the 100,
Yeah.
right? But there's a lot more.
What portion of the entire portfolio is the CBTP?
Right.
Okay,
there we
so
go.
you'll hear in the CTP presentation, we went through about 1,200, we started with about 1,200 projects for the CTP, financially unconstrained, so, yeah.
Okay.
So,
1/12.
8%.
Yeah, just something like that. Okay. Okay, very good. Any other questions, comments from the committee? No? Okay. Is there anyone wishing to speak during public comment on an item that's not part of the agenda? If so, please submit a public speaker card or raise your virtual hand, and I'll call on you. Emily, have we received any written or public comment?
We have no public comment, written or virtual.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. And Emily, I just wanted to acknowledge some members who have walked in. So we have Member Ash, Member Stark, and Member Carr. So, yep. So we have no more voting tonight, so just informational items. So the next item is an informational item that will be presented by Matt Kelly and Karina Schneider.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee members. Once again, Matt Kelly, Director of Planning, at CCTA. Great to be here again to present another acronym for you. This one just with the C and the T and the P, but no B. Yes, we are here to talk about the countywide transportation plan. Sorry for the word soup we've been presenting to you tonight, but if you've hung around CCTA long enough, you're probably becoming familiar with all these acronyms. We are here to present the countywide transportation plan, our long-range vision for transportation in Contra Costa County. I'm here with Karina Schneider from Farron Piers, and they've been working with us for the last couple of years now to develop our CTP. So we're very excited to be at the point where we have a draft, and we're here to present that to you tonight. Karina?
Great, thanks, Matt. Good evening, everyone. So here's our agenda for the evening. I'll briefly cover the process and vision for CTP 2050, which is what we're calling the CTP. And we'll go over kind of a summary of our engagement with community members as well as stakeholders throughout the county. I'll spend most of the time talking about the kind of the core components and recommendations in the plan, but then we'll spend a bit of time on Q&A and wrap up at the end. All right, so starting with process and vision. So the CTP has been a robust multi-year planning process, including a technical needs assessment and 3 phases of community and stakeholder engagement. In the first phase, the project team developed the 2050 blueprint, which really sets the foundation, kind of the policy and principles for the CTP 2050. And the board approved and adopted that in June of last year, and since then the project team has been working on developing the draft and draft final recommendations of the plan. So just a quick note on the kind of the major deliverables of this process. I just mentioned the 2050 blueprint. So again, that represents the guiding principles and strategies, guiding the CTP, and it really is meant to respond to regulatory and the policy landscape existing in present day, as well as the key issues related to transportation facing Contra Costa County. And then with that, we have been developing the countywide transportation plan, which includes transformative visions or kind of the conceptual projects, programs, and policies that we want to advance through the CTP, as well as specific project examples, policies, and programs. And then kind of in parallel, but separately, CCTA has been developing a business plan that's really meant to be a guide for CCTA staff on how to implement the CTP. So that focuses on kind of project delivery strategies, updates to business practices, as well as funding options. All right, so the CTP 2050 vision statement reads that Contra Costa residents, workers, businesses, and visitors will thrive through safe multimodal transportation systems that support a strong economy, equitable and accessible communities, and climate resilience. So this is included in the blueprint as well as the CTP 2050 principles. So there are 4 of those here. I can read these out. That includes safe travel, access for all, livable and connected neighborhoods, and growing sustainably. So all these principles really work together. They're interrelated and present a holistic approach to transportation and improving mobility in the county. All right, the next section here is going to be focusing on the 3 phases of engagement we conducted for this process. So across all 3 phases, the project team connected with community organizations and advocates, community members, and stakeholders across all 4 geographic areas of the county. The first phase was really focused on collecting input on needs and opportunities and kind of building the foundation of the blueprint. Phase 2 is focused on the transformative visions. Again, these are kind of the conceptual ways that CCTA can improve transportation in the county. And then phase 3 was kind of more narrowly focused on the CTP safety policy and the climate adaptation and resilience policy. So kind of conducting interviews and focus groups with community organizations and advocates related to those 2 topics. All right, so this slide summarizes all the engagement we conducted over the couple of years we've been developing this plan. So we had 2 online surveys that resulted in over 5,000 responses. The surveys were population weighted and provided in English, Spanish, and Chinese, and so that helped to ensure that we were getting really great representation across the county and have a variety of kind of demographic and geographic ways to, or kind of areas of input. And we were able to kind of publicize those opportunities to provide impact through a variety of ways. One was at in-person pop-up events. So we had 15 events that we attended over the course of the project. We also released online social media ads, including on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify. As I mentioned earlier, we had some focus groups with community organizations. We also did direct outreach with CBOs. They were really strong partners on this project, not only to kind of represent the historically underrepresented community members in the county, but also to help get the word out about opportunities to provide input on the project. And finally, we presented to several different stakeholder groups throughout the process, including the Citizens Advisory Committee. And the next slide actually kind of goes over all those different groups and committees that we presented to throughout the process. So by the end of this process, we'll have presented to 35 different meetings, including across a wide array of CCTA committees, as well as kind of multi-day board workshops throughout the process. So really great, we're able to receive so much great feedback from all the groups listed here. All right, now for the meat and potatoes of the presentation, we're going to go into the core components of CTP 2050. Those are organized into these kind of 4 buckets you see here. We have the transformative visions, the CTP policies, recommended updates to the growth management program, as well as projects and programs. So we'll have about a slide or 2 on each of these. So the first one here is the transformative visions. I believe the last time we came to the Citizens Advisory Committee, this was the primary topic of conversation. So we have since collected feedback from community members and stakeholders and have landed on these 3 transformative visions, which are create people first streets, build a complete reliable transit network, and provide reliable freeway travel. And so each of these 3 transformative visions has about 3 to 4 different components that make up that transformative vision. And within the CTP 2050, in order to kind of help illustrate what it looks like to implement each of these components, we identified what we're calling 5-star project examples. So these are projects that had really strong alignment with the CTP 2050 vision, had documented community support, and demonstrated effectiveness and benefits to the transportation system in Contra Costa. So there were a long list of projects to choose from, as you'll see shortly. So these really, again, are just meant to feel like tangible illustrations of what these could look like. So, for example, safer ways to get to school could look like the La Miranda school bus expansion program. For Transit for All neighborhoods, the Try My Ride microtransit expansion. For alleviating freeway bottlenecks, that could look like the SR4 operational improvements project. So these are all highlighted in the plan as examples. CTP 2050 also includes 8 different policies. So these are policies that really are meant to establish new CCTA commitments as well as incentives for local jurisdictions to improve safety and connectedness and make the transportation system more resilient as well. So these policies really build on existing CCTA policies as well as state and regional policies. And so kind of going in order here, we have the Livable Streets policy, which really focuses on roadway design that improves safety and transit, and placemaking really considers what makes a good street. And then we have a safety policy, land use, equity, climate adaptation and resilience, performance-based planning, transit, and maintenance and network operations. So on the next slide here, I'll go over some kind of examples of the kind of key summary or key components for each of the policies to share with you today. So at the top, we have under the safety policy, establish incentives for jurisdictions to adopt policies that reduce exposure, severity, and likelihood of collisions. So that could look like adopting a complete streets policy in line with the CCTA's livable streets policy. That could look like adopting a speed management plan. So we provide examples in the full policy language of what that could look like. In the livable streets policy, CCTA is committing to aligning all investments with the roadway design guidance in the livable streets playbook. Again, that's kind of a roadway design guidelines that we've developed through this process and would be included as an appendix to CTP 2050. And then under the equity policy, all programs will be needs-based and focused on providing access and mobility options for underserved users. So that can include seniors, youth, people with disabilities in all areas of the county, but also considering underserved communities themselves and providing, in connection with the CVTP, what those needs are. Then the climate policy, we have evaluate all investments for opportunities to address emergency evacuation and climate resilience. CCTA will also establish a performance-based planning framework to guide investment and monitor effectiveness. So essentially setting policy and kind of metrics that CCTA would like to hit with its investments. So that's able to monitor and track over time how well and how successful CCTA is in achieving those goals. And finally, under the land use policy, we have support multimodal improvements in transit serving areas. So that could be BART stations, mobility hubs, making sure there's first, last mile connections to those places. All right, moving next into recommended updates to the growth management program. So I think folks here are familiar with the growth management program. Essentially is initiated through Measure C, but continued through Measure J. It's really a set of rules, guidelines, incentives for local jurisdictions to really consider impacts to transportation as their population, household numbers grow over time. So just to note that these are recommendations for the growth management program, so we're not updating the GMP through CTP 2050. These recommendations would need to be updated through the TEP process. So the first recommendation is to update the transportation impact analysis requirements to clarify that TAAs only apply to discretionary projects. It's not necessary to do that for ministerial or by right projects in order to kind of streamline the approval process. So that's kind of connected to existing state legislation. Next is to add a checklist item to ensure that projects incorporate the Livable Streets objective design standards for adjacent roadways. So again, that's part of the Livable Streets playbook that I mentioned on the previous slide. There's also a section in there for kind of developers and local jurisdictions to consider as they're doing a development project, what types of improvements are appropriate for the roadways adjacent to that development. Next is to modernize the Transportation Systems Management Program to reflect current TDM practices and reforms. So that can include addressing, what might be today parking minimums at near transit stations and changing that to parking maximums, for example. And finally, we have update implementation guidance for TIAs and RTPC action plans to emphasize roadway safety, multimodal access, and complete streets over vehicle delay. So that's really a commitment that CCTA is making to prioritize safety and accepting some level of vehicle delay if that means that the improvement will reduce or minimize and hopefully eliminate severe injury and fatal collisions on local roadways. All right, a few more slides here on projects. As Matt mentioned earlier, there are about 1,200 projects included in the CTP, sourced largely from the 2023 call for projects. But we did do a scan to ensure that the projects aligned with the CTP 2050 vision and would help to realize the blueprint. So the projects are categorized into the 7 categories listed in this table here. So the large majority of the projects are complete streets and local roadway projects. And of those 1,200 projects, about 180 are projects we're calling named projects. So these are kind of high capital cost projects, about $10 million or more. And just about 10-15% of projects actually consist of about 80% of the total project list cost. So these are really high value major projects. And again, you can see in the map here, span a wide variety of different categories and are present in all areas of the county. And so we know that those will be ones that will be perhaps more difficult to fund, but could be more transformational. So something to keep in mind as we move into next steps in the TEP. Last slide here on programs. So the CTP 2050 document really commits CCTA to continuing to advance its programs. And so many of these programs really aim to improve safety and connectivity for residents all throughout the county, and specifically for residents that face greater mobility challenges than others. And so some of those programs include the youth and transportation programs, reduced fare transit passes, school bus programs, safe routes to school are examples of that. Shuttle mobility programs to support senior impaired transit mobility. We have the 511 CCTA program to help with TDM. Mobility hubs and smart traffic signal operations are all examples of what CCTA is already doing today and would like to continue to do. All right, I think with that, we'll pause here for questions and comments. Just a note on next steps that we do plan to take the full CTP 2050 document to the board in July for kind of initial approval, and then next CCTA staff will move into the environmental impact report process. So once the EIR is complete, that's the time in which the official final CTP 2050 document can be approved. So in that July board packet is where you'll be able to find the full kind of documentation of CTP 2050, but we're still in the midst of wrapping it up. So just wanted to make sure we shared the core kind of recommendations and components with you today.
Yes, thank you very much, Matt and Katrina, for the presentation and for letting us know where the full document is. Might be some weekend reading for some of us. And with that, are there questions, comments from the members? Member Saunders.
So one comment and one question that maybe you can answer. So I think I like the focus on the safety and the multimodal stuff. I mean, we've talked about it a few times, but I think that's, good, and it's coming out in the document. So a couple slides back, it talked like that 1,100 projects or whatever. It was like 21.6 billion, I think is what it said. How much funding is there even going to be in the scheme? I mean, is it a fraction of what we might want to do? I mean, clearly you're not doing everything, but I don't have a scale of this accomplishes a whole bunch, or, it's just a tad and you do your best kind of thing.
So I think you'll hear a little bit about that in the TEP presentation, but we, in general, a new sales tax measure similar to Measure J, and really what we're talking about is an extension of Measure J, not a new half-cent sales tax. So that would generally bring in, Measure J will have brought in by the end of its 25 years, 25 years, about 3.2 billion. So some are a little over 3 billion. And we, in the past, have leveraged about 3 times that amount. So about $9 billion, close to $10 billion in total project funding. That gets us maybe halfway there for the total capital cost, which is, not all the way, but it's a decent dent. Yeah, and a lot of those projects are included in this list. They're just not the named projects. They're like the bundled small projects, but they're in there.
Yeah, and some of these projects are kind of massive multi-jurisdictional projects. For example, like BART core capacity is like one of the projects in this list, and so if a new measure is approved, that the next measure wouldn't be the only measure or funding source for a project like that of that magnitude. And so there are some projects in this list that are just going to require multiple sources of funding.
Yeah, you just brought up BART core capacity. I have a question about that. I mean, wouldn't that be in BART's budget?
Because it's something, and I can let Matt speak to this too, but because it's something that would be, that would support regional mobility, I think it's in CCTA's best interest and other jurisdictions' best interest to help try to support the advancement of a project like that. But yes, like, I think, but BART would be the core sponsor of that project, and would actually help to see implementation through.
However, they do identify kind of a county share or contribution for that project. So there is a certain amount that CCTA is technically supposed to provide. I shouldn't say CCTA, but should come from Contra Costa.
Okay, Member Bankert.
I understand that Fear and Prayers is kind of helping identify needs using safety, access, being connected, and sustainability and the projects and weighting them. Does Fear and Prayers actually help with the recommendation for prioritizing the projects, or is it just a matter of just presenting the data and the Transportation Authority is taking ownership of the prioritization?
Yeah, so this plan, the CTB 2050, is an unconstrained plan, and so this is really like, in a perfect world with like unlimited funding, like these are the types of projects that CCTA would want to fund because they meet the goals of, you know, access for all, sustainability, et cetera. So there wasn't a prioritization process as part of this project. But as we've been talking about, the transportation expenditure plan, which is the next presentation, is going to require some kind of prioritization process because that will be a constrained plan.
Did that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Member Wayne.
Yeah, when BART says, like, when BART has, or any BART, I'm just using BART as an example, but when they say Contra Costa owns, like, say, 10% of this, is there a negotiation there? Do you say, wait a minute, this county's paying this much, or do you just, that's BART says this is what you pay?
Yeah, there is some negotiations that go on. You know, I think in the past it's been around contributing to some of those kind of customer enhancements, like keeping the cars clean and stuff. So we had our last measure that didn't pass did have some language in there where CCTA would contribute its own funds towards, you know, clean cars and security and things like that. But so, you know, and that was something that our board felt Contra Costa residents wanted, and therefore we were willing to contribute. So I think it depends on what the improvement is. Generally, we're planning alongside BART for projects that are within Contra Costa County, like the, you know, like the eBART extension out to Antioch. That was something that CCTA was very much in the lead with BART. We were kind of leading that project, co-leading that project. And so I think it just depends on the project. But yeah, we definitely negotiate with BART on you know, the level of contribution, you know, and you know, because there, in some cases, we feel like we deserve more because we have more riders, or we have a, you know, a certain, we provide a certain number of riders to the system. But then there's cases where we think, no, we shouldn't be contributing to, you know, a certain set of improvements because they might not positively impact Contra Costa riders. So it's you know, it just depends.
So is it the board that makes all these decisions, or do you have like a head of CCTA?
We do have a head of CCTA who will be presenting the next item. So he does work closely with BART, but also we have BART on our board.
But I was just curious about, is it the board that makes the decision?
Ultimately, yes.
Are they
Our
like
board,
the top of the food chain?
yes, and we do have BART sitting on our board as an ex officio member.
Right, okay, thanks.
Member Shakirin.
Quick question. Under the project list focused on transit, complete streets and freeways, one of the categories is resilience. Could you explain that to me? What type of projects resilience? Is there an example you could give? Out of the 1,191 total, it says 8 of them are resilience projects.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
you know, it falls probably under the resilience and adaptation. So dealing with climate change, some of our sea level rise, some of our roadways around the edge of the county, maybe underwater under certain sea level rise
okay.
scenarios. Also, there, it may be referring to our, the evacuation plan. We see that as looking at the resilience of the county's transportation system, whether there's, more than one option for folks to use to get out. So
Okay.
making sure that resiliency is there in all aspects of transportation.
Okay, thank you.
Member Ash.
How does this fit into the MTC Plan Bay Area 2050?
It doesn't feed into the current Plan Bay Area 2050, but it will feed into the next, which is going to be Plan Bay Area 2060. So, yeah, all the county transportation agencies were asked to complete their countywide plans by the end of 2026 in order to inform that next Plan Bay Area update.
Got it. And just because we've been talking a whole bunch about BART, if BART goes off the fiscal cliff, hypothetically speaking, due to the sales tax measure, how does that impact funding for all of these other things and what our plans are?
Yeah, so I mean, the outcome of that ballot measure later this year doesn't affect like the overall vision for the CTP, for CTP 2050, but it may affect the TEP, so the Transportation Expenditure Plan. So yeah, there could be kind of a shift in more prioritizing transit projects through the TEP if that measure fails. I think that's a TBD. Another acronym
Yeah.
for you all.
But in general, this is a visionary plan looking out 25 years. So our hope is that, in the next, several years that we don't know what will happen. So our assumption is that things will be in place in the future and our visionary plans will be implementable, and that we won't have lost entire transportation networks in the meantime. It's kind of an assumption you have to make in the planning world because, there are so many unknowns. But certainly we will know a lot more in the next 6 months.
Vice Chair.
Thank you. One question, how is the draft balancing investment in new infrastructure against like long-term cost of maintaining existing roads?
So I need to check if maintenance is something that's already actually integrated into Measure J, for example. So some of that return to source funding kind of goes to longer term maintenance implementation. So I'd say like the projects, especially the named projects in this list, which are again the majority of the cost of the project list, are to build and construct projects and get them on the ground. And so the 22 billion listed here does not include ongoing maintenance for those projects.
Okay, that makes sense. I asked because all these projects will introduce, they will impact the roads, right, the existing system to a certain extent. So I guess I'm just trying to understand if there's some type of funding set up to maintain it. But like you said, Measure J will take care of that. I'm just assuming, like, depending on how big or how much growth comes from all these projects, will that be enough to maintain the existing infrastructure?
Right, and Measure J is the existing measure right now. So in the TEP, there would need to be a kind of a calculation of, how much of that funding goes directly to maintenance. And it would need to take into account, continued growth.
Yeah, and so that's being looked at as part of the TEP development right now. So all that is still in play.
Okay, and it looks like we have nobody online, correct, Emily?
We have no public comment, written or virtual.
Okay, I just wanted to make a quick comment that, with both of these plans, I guess particularly the CTB plan, it's really nice that, a lot of the themes that we've discussed along, this past year, they're being addressed here. So we've had a lot of look back and, we're curious, where are we going in the future? So it's really nice to have this kind of future outlook, for all our members to see what is the planning process and where are we going. So thank you very much for bringing this to this committee.
I actually think this is the most interesting part of being on this group.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so with that, thank you very much for your presentation. The next item is an informational item that will be introduced by Matt Kelly and presented by the one and only Tim Hale.
I'm just going to do a very brief introduction here. I'm going to hand it off to my executive director, Tim Hale, who is leading the TEP process, Transportation Expenditure Plan. Memorize that one because you're going to be hearing about it a lot over the next couple of years, and hopefully before too long you'll have a chance to have your say on an extension of our sales tax measure. But I'm not going to spoil all the surprises. I'm just going to hand it over to Tim and have him walk you through the TEP. Tim?
Thanks, Matt. Good evening, everyone. First, I really want to thank you for all the late nights you have here on a monthly basis supporting CCTA and all the great work that we do here as an agency. You all, I think, really represent an important function of CCTA, representing the public and representing the needs of the communities that we serve. And I think it's really important that you all are part of this process that we're going to start undertaking as part of the Transportation Expenditure Plan. The Transportation Expenditure Plan, just for a little bit of background for all of you, our current expenditure plan is the Measure J expenditure plan. It expires in 2034, so just want to make sure that's really clear to everyone. And what we're undertaking is a potential renewal of that 0.5% sales tax. So just to give you all maybe a little bit of background, CCTA has now attempted to renew our measure twice. We did one in 2016. And it failed at 64%. So just so you all know, because we are a special district, the approval of our measure, our expenditure plan, has to be at 67% of the vote. So it's a very high bar and a very high threshold. And in 2020, we attempted to renew the measure, and it also failed. And that was a really odd and difficult time to really have any success at the ballot. We went during the primary in March of 2020, and we got 54% of the vote at the time. And I can tell you that was the worst, even in November of 2020, that was the worst ballot in history for these types of initiatives and measures. So we have hit paused and kind of been doing a lot of thinking about how we want to proceed and how we want to think about the future. And you just heard a lot of that relative to the countywide transportation plan. So the CTP was really supposed to be the foundation of the future and kind of where we want to go as an agency, where we want to go with transportation. And you got to see a lot of that. And that's why we kind of timed these presentations the way that we did. So the CTP identified essentially about 1,200 projects, roughly about $12 billion in need in Contra Costa County. And so now the next step is how are we going to fund those needs in Contra Costa County? That's kind of the next step for you and us as staff, as well as the CCTA board to kind of undertake is how are we going to fund all these needs that we have in Contra Costa County? So as part of the TEP process, CCTA board essentially instructed staff to start developing and start pursuing a transportation expenditure plan back in June of 2024. 2025. And so we've been kind of coming up with the process in which we're going to undertake to work towards a successful expenditure plan. There's a lot of steps involved. The first phase is really what we're calling listening. And the listening phase, what I can tell you for this particular, I'll say third time's a charm, is we have started earlier than we ever have in the process. So in 2020, we only gave ourselves roughly about 6 to 9 months to pursue that undertaking, which was not enough time. It did not allow us the time to really get into the community and do a lot of outreach, to really understand what the needs and priorities are. In 2016, we started roughly about 18 months before. And so the CCTA board has not determined when we will actually place a measure on the ballot. Our target at this point will be the 2028 November presidential election. So that's kind of what we're targeting right now. So this is the earliest we've ever have started this process. And we took that as kind of a lesson learned from the last 2 attempts to really start early, get in the community, and really start understanding what the needs and priorities are of the community. So we are in phase 1, which is listening. And as part of the listening phase, we are going through all of our advisory committees to really get feedback from you on, what are your pain points? What are you seeing? And since you all represent the 19 cities of Contra Costa County, particularly the most important people of this process is the public, we really find you as a very valuable advisory group for CCTA in this process. So I have about 4 or 5 slides here, and then we'll kind of have a conversation. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because you've already have seen this in the last presentation. But the CTP, I cannot stress enough that the CTP is really important to this process. Like, it has laid the foundation, and our vision for the future is a safe, connected, and accessible transportation system. And through Measure J, about $2.5 billion of investment from sales tax, and that has realized roughly about $5.6 billion of total investment in Contra Costa County. We've been able to deliver a lot of key projects, right? So Fourth Board Caldecott Tunnel, the expansion of Highway 4, programs for seniors, programs for students, important trail connections and bicycle and pedestrian projects. And probably the one thing that's probably you all oversee is the growth management program and the local streets and roads, the LSM money, right? You have a specific role in that. And so through that role that you serve, we have actually distributed roughly about $228 million to local jurisdictions for local street and roads maintenance. And that is obviously a lot of checklists that you all have reviewed as part of that process, these growth management checklists. And I think it's really important that, again, that the local jurisdictions are supporting the goals of these programs, but also as CCTA as a whole. And so that's all done through the growth management program, which you're all very familiar with. This will continue to be a key element in a future transportation expenditure plan. And one of the things that we will be discussing and not necessarily talking about today is we will be talking about updating the growth management program as part of this process. And I'll say, quote unquote, modernize the growth management program. And I think you all will have, a role to have in that as we think about what updates and what changes we might want to undertake or do as part of the growth management program. So as part of the listening phase, we are doing these Mentimeters, and these Mentimeters are great. I'm going to ask you all to pull out your devices, and you can do this on a computer, you can do this on an iPad, you can do this on a tablet, you can do this on your phone, but I'm going to ask you basically a total of 5 questions. And this is our way of kind of listening. And then we also have another process in which you'll be able to provide direct feedback. So into the process. And so with that being said, let me switch screens and start the Mentimeter. So here's the QR code. So you'll scan the QR code. That's the first step. And then this question should pop up on your device. And this will happen in real time. These responses are completely anonymous. But this is a phrase or a few words that you would want to describe as a potential way to improve today in your city or town. And you can actually submit multiple requests or multiple answers. You don't need to submit just one. So you can submit one and then submit another one and submit another one. But and so you'll be able to, and then we'll be able to see them up on the screen kind of in real time. So better school traffic management, that seems to be a really important topic, I think pretty consistent across the entire county in terms of helping to reduce congestion and traffic around our schools. Autonomous vehicles, I think that's a benefit to having on-demand transportation within our communities. Faster service to BART. A better connection between Pittsburgh and Walnut Creek through Ignacio Valley Road and Kirker Pass. Free shuttles in downtown, kind of similar to what I think County Connection provides in Walnut Creek. San Pablo Dam Road improvements. So I think that's becoming a critical link between the La Miranda and Eaton West County areas. More frequent bus service. So safer pedestrian crossings. A bypass to Ignacio Valley Road. I'm sure YVR is not the easiest road to travel at 8 o'clock in the morning. Aerial transit. Now we're getting creative. It's not too far off. I think I've told you that before. eVTOLs and advanced air mobility is not too far off. We're talking probably 2 to 3 years. Sidewalks everywhere. So we have 7 out of 10 respondents, so we have 3 folks still kind of thinking about it. And we're asking these questions among everybody. So just so you know, as you're kind of thinking about this. So the listening that we're undertaking right now is essentially kind of asking these questions and then providing you another, I'll explain that later, but we asked these same questions of the CCTA board at our board workshop 2 weeks ago. We've been asking all the advisory committees these same questions, and then the idea is we'll take all this information and synthesize and kind of come up with some feedback for our board. Okay, so there's kind of there is, what's interesting about that answer is there was a project in Plan Bay area that was a gondola that went from San Ramon to Walnut Creek. And it was in the RTP. I think we ended up taking it out, right, Matt? Yeah. So it's no longer in the RTP, but it was a project. It was a gondola project that was in the RTP at one point in time.
They took it out of Disneyland too.
Yeah.
The people mover. I'm sorry, the people mover.
So this is Now, another little fun thing that this tool does is that when you hit the space bar, let me see if I can do this really quick. It'll actually synthesize all the answers into AI. So public transit enhancements, pedestrian infrastructure, innovative transportation modes, traffic flow optimization. So I'll kind of pause there. I mean, does anyone feel like something's missing from this list? You know, and I'm happy to toggle back between this list and the other list, but is there something that would be really transformative? Like, what is one-way travel that could be improved? Your commute today in your city or town. It could be local, could be a commute, could be anything. So what is one-way travel could be improved today in your city or town? So do you feel like, so we're hearing public transit, innovation, traffic flow optimization, pedestrian infrastructure. I mean, is there anything that you feel like is missing from this list? Yeah, I can toggle back.
On-demand transit everywhere.
On-demand transit everywhere. Really? That's a good sign. That's good. That's a good sign. We want people riding BART. More BART cars. Okay. BART would love hearing that right now. Anything else that feels like it's standing out that might be missing?
I just think addressing the routes of regional significance, what you saw in San Pablo Dam Road and you saw with Ignacio Kirker Pass, right? Addressing a couple of those big, thoroughfares throughout the county really make a difference because that's something that people can feel tangible. Oh, my commute got 3 minutes faster to X, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think with the next transportation expenditure plan, I think something that we've been kind of hearing a lot of is a big local investment into the arterial system.
Yeah, and to that point, I realize that the aerial, whoever put that up, that was a great thing to put up there. I guess the one big that I kind of recognize is that because of the build out into, we've become the bedroom communities, right? And that's only even being compounded even more as like Walnut Creek is replacing Shadelands with housing. So it's just housing. And then there's no way to expand the local arterials because you're talking about, it's called multi-billion dollars a mile to try and acquire, through, I forget the phrase, when public lands are. Well, no, I'm saying when you.
You mean like condemnation?
Eminent domain, thank you.
Yeah, eminent domain condemnation, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, there's no way, basically, there's no room to make the streets wider. And so then that becomes a question of, if it can't be the streets at the ground level, what can it be, right? And you're just throwing out stupid ideas, double deckers.
No idea is
We
stupid.
did
No,
that.
it's an old-fashioned idea. It's called public transit.
Yeah. No, but, like Big Dig, subways in the East Bay. I'm talking about things that don't operate on the same plane as property where we've got that problem. That's the issue that we have, is we're crammed in. And the space to move is going to have to be not on that level of the plane, in my mind. You just can't expand those arterials. That was all I was thinking.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've seen that actually in other countries, actually. I mean, there's countries like Australia, Sweden. I mean, there's a lot of, not just on the public transit side, but like really elaborate tunnel systems.
And elevated
and
walkways,
building-
bikeways
yeah.
in Japan, they've been putting those up lately.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just like really elaborate, like underground infrastructure, yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Or up above, like you were saying, like elevated, New York has those long walkways between, blocks and neighborhoods for pedestrian access, and then you don't have crosswalks and stuff down at the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, Japan moves more people underground than they do above ground. The next question, what are your most significant transportation challenges? And this is one you've got a limited choice. You get to choose 2 out of these 9. And it's hard to read up there, so I will read them out loud, and you'll be able to see them on your device. But traffic congestion, condition of roads, limited public transit options, pedestrian and bicyclist safety, senior and accessible transportation, parking availability, transportation affordability, school student transportation. So we're already getting some initial responses in. Seems like we've got 4 folks. Traffic congestion, conditions of roads, and school, student transit. Okay, we've got limited public transit coming in, pedestrian and bicyclist safety. Traffic congestion is no surprise to all of us, right? I mean, I feel like 95% of people in Contra Costa County actually drive. So everyone is faced with congestion. And I think to your point, Member Miller, we're not going to be able to widen ourselves out of congestion. So, right, so how are we going to address our congestion and traffic needs in Contra Costa County?
And I understand that demand destruction is also part of that. I mean, it's not all additive. There has to be some subtractive somewhere too, but.
So we have a few other responses. Another, I'll say vote for limited public transit option. So a few more to respond here. So as you all were waiting for those last respondents to come in, out of this list, is there a challenge that's not on here that you're facing as you think about your transportation commute or just local travel? You know, what are your challenges in terms of getting to where you need to go in Contra Costa County, whether that's be going to drop off for schools or downtown areas, or going to Target, going to the library, going to work? I mean, are there any challenges that are not here that you're facing with?
Getting to the, getting to the BART station.
Getting to the
So
BART
from
station?
home to BART station.
Yeah.
I know some areas, some cities have the buses that'll take you to the BART station, but I'm in Brentwood. We do have some bus, but I think it takes more time
Yeah.
to the BART station than traveling on BART, so.
I'll second that.
Plus the last mile.
Yeah. City of Brentwood has the worst commute in the country, according to an article that came out about 4 months ago. And and you don't have good access to transit.
Yeah.
Because BART stops in Antioch, right? So, I think that's a really important need for Contra Costa County.
Congratulations on being number 1. You got to look at it the
On
right way,
something.
Tim. Number 1, baby.
That's something, yeah.
I'd say parking availability is not an issue.
Parking availability
Yeah.
is not an issue? Okay, not a challenge?
Well, not at some BART stations. The thing that's coming out in my mind that is potentially not on the list is, I guess it would be distribution of resources, and I know that's overly general. What I mean is, for example, you mentioned Target, right? There used to be over at Ignacio Valley and Kirker Pass, where Ignacio turns into Kirker Pass at Clayton Road. About 2 blocks away from there used to be a Kmart, for example, another department store. There's no department store now that Kmart's gone. And so that kind of shopping, so there's this distribution of things, shopping, job centers are, again, that's another thing that's highly concentrated. And so those two things, I would say, you've got a lot of TDM that's being generated out of, well, of course, out of jobs, but there's also a lot of TDM generated out of just there's not certain retail distributed, evenly across. That's not something that can be solved directly by CCTA, for example, but it might be incentivized by MTC or something to, incentivize through some sort of tax, local tax or something measures, or breaks, I should say, to have things created in certain areas that would do some demand destruction.
Yeah, I mean, that's the age-old question about, land use and transportation, right? So making sure that we're planning the land use to, in a way that complements our existing infrastructure and not creating more challenges to it.
Yeah, along those lines, walkable neighborhoods, like I don't live in a walkable neighborhood. We're near a school, but there aren't really any resources, no mini marts, no restaurants, nothing to walk to. And I lived in Berkeley off of College Avenue. It was wonderful. I could just walk down the street and get my hair cut or go to the store. So there aren't that many kinds of those types of neighborhoods that you just want to stay and walk in.
Can I add that what you see up there is reflected, it reflects who's sitting here. And right now, there's no one from the city of Richmond, which represents 10% of the population of the area you serve, at least. And there's no one here from Pinole, which is at the far end of what AC Transit serves. There's no one here from San Pablo, which is, is about as equity priority community as you can get. And I think I'm the only one that came here tonight by public transit. So there's not many people here who can speak up for that little column there, limited public transit options. When I'm in that nice walkable urban area that you were talking about in Berkeley 2 days ago, and I'm trying to get home, and I look at the AC Transit app, and 2 of the buses that could have gotten me close to El Cerrito have been canceled. And so like a friend of mine who recently had to wait 45 minutes for a bus to get her down San Pablo Avenue, 45 minutes on San Pablo Avenue, that's a trunk line. That's a state highway. There's many, many people who live within 15-minute walk of San Pablo Avenue. It's scandalous that we don't have every 10-minute service on that kind of trunk line. So I just want to say that the answers you get depend on who you ask. So.
Yeah, 100%. I think our listening is far and wide across Contra Costa County. We have multiple phases. I'm happy to answer more questions about what that process is going to look like. But Karina is actually part of our TEP team, and as well as Lindy Johnson, our Director of External Affairs, have been kind of handling a lot of the listening phase that we're going to be embarking on over the next 6 months or so. And that's the benefit, is really getting into the community. I think a big part, to your point, a big part of our strategy with this round of listening and public engagement is, to your point, we're not trying to get people to come to us, like how you're coming to us today. What we're trying to do is really go to the places where people are at, right? So we're trying to look and find places where are people going to, where can we go find good input, good people from the community, and there'll be an opportunity for you to kind of share that later in the presentation, but I want to make sure that's another thing why you're here, in terms of you represent the community, you represent the public, and so we want to know where are good places to go in your community to get input. So to your point, Member Pace, I think the next question is very relevant to the next question. Let me see here. So what is the first word that comes to mind when you think of our county's current transit system and transit infrastructure? So again, this is not transportation infrastructure. This is not highways and walkways and bikeways. This is transit infrastructure. So this would be bus stops, BART stations, transit infrastructure. And I think you can do multiple responses on this one as well. And if you want to double down on a word, the word will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you put like the word, antiquated or whatever, like in your response, the more responses you get that are similar, the bigger the words will get. So some of the responses, we got incomplete, slow, antiquated, insufficient, lack of funds, very, very true, fragmented, resource constrained. I mean, I think that's a common theme. I think not fully built out, disconnected, unreliable, innovative, car-centric. So I think that's all of the response. So that's kind of gives you a little neat word cloud. Okay, we'll go on to the next question. Okay, so what are your top 2 challenges in accessing destinations in other areas of the county or outside the county? So the first challenge was really about local travel and just kind of generalizing, but this is particularly focused on more getting around in the county, not necessarily in your city, but what are the challenges in terms of getting around in the county and outside of the county? So like if you were trying to get from like Walnut Creek to Pittsburgh or Brentwood or vice versa, or go all the way to Richmond or go to San Francisco, like this is more focused about kind of travel across the county and outside the county.
So if my answer about last mile, I would check inconvenient transfer points.
Yeah, I would put it there.
Okay.
Or limited schedules, is pretty small, but limited public transportation routes or schedules, high transportation cost, fuel, which everyone feels that burden right now, long travel times or traffic congestion, insufficient transportation options for seniors or people with disabilities, safety concerns related to biking, walking, and driving, inconvenient transit, transfer points, or poor coordination between services, feeling safe on transit, access to trails. So we got some good responses, I think, on congestion and limited public transit options. Looks like the next highest one is inconvenient transit, transfer points, or poor connection points. Next one after that is feeling safe on transit. So it seems like the top 3 here are really transit related and then obviously traffic congestion. All right, anything that might be missing from this one? Any challenges that you're experiencing that may not be on this list as you're traveling across the county or outside the county?
Not really, but I just wanted to say that, there's a theme between those 3, which is time, which is, limited routes or schedules, there's either that it's not frequent enough or that they can get to where they want fast enough. Long travel times, same thing. this inconvenient transit transfer point, I had originally answered as long travel times and moved it over to that after you had spoken with member Pace. I'd said that, you know, like getting from Clayton to BART is itself just, you know, challenge.
Yeah.
It's about a half an hour, and worse if there's, if you actually wait until there's traffic. And so, yeah, that 5 and 4 some of those may actually be the same issue of just distance. I guess I'm going to say distance to, or travel time to accessibility of transit itself, of mass transit itself.
Yeah, access to transit. Yeah, access to transit. Any other challenges that folks are facing that are not on this list?
I would just think the 680 corridor where there is, you know, nothing. Going from here to like Livermore or Fremont, it's not really accessible, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's not good transit options from Walnut Creek, BART to South County and beyond.
Yeah, like a person in Concord, a job in, it sounds like it would be a reasonable number of miles to drive to a job in Dublin until you look at that 680 commute corridor. It's not good, yeah.
Any other challenges? I see Member Sanders.
I think just it kind of ties to what you guys are saying. I mean, I'm lucky. It's all about how long it's going to take me to get there. I don't care if I drive my car. If there's a bus line and it's going to take 40 minutes, I can be there in 12 in my car, I'm not taking the bus. So I think depending on what economic group you're in, that piece ties together to bad transit connections, bad, you know, throughput, you know, buses every 5. I mean, it's just, it all leads to, well, I'll drive, which just spins it, you know, worse, I think.
Tim, is the Glideways project that was talked about in East County and was publicized, is that still on the books? And I know West County was also studying a Glideways program.
Yeah, those two projects are still ongoing. You know, we did the East County Integrated Transit Plan, which did study this transit connection to Brentwood from Antioch BART, and the recommendations from that was essentially a BRT down the median or express bus. And we're also evaluating this Glideways concept in terms of an automated alternative. And so we are currently pursuing a project initiation document with Caltrans because the project is in the median of the Caltrans right-of-way in the middle of the freeway. And so we have to go through their process. So we're in the process of drafting a project study report, which is essentially like a feasibility study that'll evaluate the alternatives. So we have what we're calling the automated transit network alternative, express bus, and BRT that are being evaluated as part of that study. And then once that study is completed, then it'll start making the project give the project more access to state funding. So, and then the Richmond project, the city of Richmond is still working on their feasibility study for the automated transit network project. I don't know the current status of it at this point.
And would those projects possibly be in for funding under the new sales tax measure? Does that timeline arrive?
Those are all decisions to be yet made. Yeah. So I think as we go through the TEP process, there will be an evaluation process of projects. And so that's something that we're trying to determine right now. And so through the listening phase of the project, of the TEP process, which will happen between now and like fall, we're also developing what we're calling a TEP framework. And the TEP framework will have that evaluation process kind of somewhat defined. And so we are going to the authority board in July to kind of introduce some of those concepts to the board and to start developing that framework. And we also talked about some of the framework of the TEP with the board at the last board workshop as well. So the TEP is being guided by 5 pillars. So those 5 pillars are community first. So really putting the public and community first, which obviously you all play an important part of. The second one is keep it simple. We have found that even the current Measure J expenditure plan, as well as the 2 last expenditure plans that was in 2016, 2020, were very complicated, and the public didn't really understand what they were getting. So trying to keep it really simple to the public, which also helps with transparency and accountability. The third one is apply a countywide lens. As you all know, we have 19 cities and jurisdictions, as well as four could argue 5 subregions. So how do we really think about and balance the countywide, the regional, and local needs as we think about a future expenditure plan? The 4th pillar is accountability, and I think that'll be front and center. Also, this group represents a big part of that relative to our current expenditure plan. And then the 5th pillar is really focused on performance, and so we do believe that the next expenditure plan will be focusing on really high performing, high return on investment type projects and programs. And that evaluation of how to identify those projects that's the framework that we're trying to develop right now. The schedule, I didn't really get into schedule, but we have listening from now until fall. And then we want to better understand the outcome of SB 63, which is the regional transportation measure that's going to be going to the vote in November. Once we better understand the outcome, we'll have a better sense of potentially what a TEP might look like. And so the goal is to put out an initial draft transportation expenditure plan to the board for discussion sometime in early 2027. And with essentially trying to get to adoption of that expenditure plan by November of 2027. And then we would then, and meaning adoption, meaning approved by the board. In order for CCTA to place a measure on the ballot, we have to have, this is actual statutory requirement that's written in our law under Public Utility Code, but we have to have the resolutions of support from the majority of the cities with the majority of the population in order to put a measure on the ballot, right? So there's a process in which we have to undertake to even qualify, to put something on the ballot. So, and so the goal would be to get all that done by early 2028, and then that gives us plenty of time to do education of what's in the actual expenditure plan before 2028. So it gives you a little framing. But yeah, to your point, Member Ash, is, we will undertake some sort of process to identify which projects and programs will be funded by the transportation expenditure plan. All yet to come and be determined. All right, let's go on to the next. I think this is the final question. So what are your top ideas for how to make transportation better in the future? So this is just big, huge ideas, wow ideas, pie in the sky, really big, transformative ideas and outcomes to make transportation better in the future. And this is, again, a phrase, so you can put a phrase and then you can submit multiple phrases. Got 12 folks, which means you're all logged in and connected, which I love. Autonomous vehicles, enable automated transport. Believe in regional approach and cities collaborating. So I love that one. I think that really goes along the line that apply countywide lens pillar. Use the most advanced technologies. Increase public transit frequency, isochrome maps, multi-level roadways and walkways and airways, so bringing in that 3D component, Aerial affordability, aerial meaning like aerial in the sky affordability. Yeah, I mean, just so you all know, you know, Archer, Joby, those folks, their market is, and their business model is kind of based on like an Uber Black model. That's kind of the price point that they're kind of thinking. So as you think about Uber Black, that's kind of what their price point is going to be for air mobility and travel. School buses, free public transit, consistent and timely public transportation, so reliability, smart application of systems and technology. So this gets into like mobility systems, which I think is a huge part of our future, like smart signals. Community awareness of taking public transit to avoid congestion, so travel training. I think that's a great program to think about for the future. Reduce the number of competing transit agencies, solve the last mile travel problem. See two of those actually there. Signal coordination. So we have 11 out of 12. I'm going to hit the AI travel training. So I'm going to hit, don't demonize people who drive a personal vehicle. 100% agree. We will always drive in Contra Costa County, 100%. So I'm going to hit the AI function. Let's see what it comes up with. So public transit improvements, autonomous technology, regional coordination, accessible solutions. So, and I'm happy to toggle back and forth again, but does anyone feel like there's anything missing from this that did not get captured in your responses? And I'm happy to toggle back and forth here.
I would just think the coordination is, kind of ties in with all of those. As the region's population grows, there's just going to be more coordination.
Yeah, I think the question that we're trying to understand is who is the agency that's best to do that coordination? Is it CCTA, you know, or what agency would it be?
How does the 19 cities kind of play into this overall equation? Are they involved, or do you guys have to bring them with twisting their arms, or is it easy enough? But how do they fit into the overall equation?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we have essentially 4 targeted audiences that we're really focusing on as part of the listening phase and as part of the process. So the first targeted audience is local agencies. So that would be cities, the trans operators, the regional transportation planning committees. And then our second targeted audience is what we're calling stakeholders. So this would be like your advocacy groups, you know, business groups, you know, labor, those types of things. And then the third important group is the public, right? The actual community. And then the fourth one is CCTA. And when we say CCTA, it's not just the authority board itself, but also all of our advisory committees, including yourselves. And so relative to the city specifically, yeah, they represent a really key component to the success of the expenditure plan. I think what we need to do is we need to develop an expenditure plan that is obviously widely supported by all of these targeted audiences, you know, to a certain extent. But the key to the cities is really getting the cities, the city managers, the city staff, as well as the councils to get really excited about this, so that way they can, you know, they can really help really bridge that connection to the public, which in the communities that we serve and they serve, with the expenditure plan, right? And so, because it's going to be really important to make sure that everyone can really identify how they're going to benefit from this expenditure plan, right? It's just the constant, like, what's in it for me, right? That's the really key component. So for the city specifically, is we're forming a technical working group that is representative of the 19 cities. And so that technical working group will essentially be I'll call it a steering committee, if you will, to help guide the development of the expenditure plan and help bring and build consensus among the cities. So we're really looking for like key, I'll say, ambassadors, you know, that can help bring along and make key decisions and be be solution-oriented, be willing to compromise, and be able to carry that message forward to the 19 cities.
That's great. I just scanned this QR, and I don't know if everybody has the access to it, maybe giving it to the cities to put it in their notice board or something, maybe that'll give access to
Yeah,
a lot
that
of public.
QR code is my last slide.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll get there, I'll get there in a minute, so. Okay, any other feedback on this? Anything else kind of just apparent missing from this? Okay, so we'll move on. I think that's the end of the presentation. So now, give me a moment to switch screens again. Back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so we now have completed the Menti. And so that was our first phase of kind of listening tonight. Our second phase of listening is actually something that you can all do outside of this room and after the meeting. So we have, what we really want you to do is really become ambassadors for this process. You're all here for a reason. You all here representing the communities that you serve and that we serve, and we need a lot of ambassadors for us to be able to really connect with and really understand what the community's needs are, what their pain points are, what's going well, what kind of improvements do people want to see. So we are now officially tonight appointing you ambassadors of the CCTA TEP process. This is not the first time we're going to talk about it. This will be an ongoing process, an ongoing discussion. The CCTA staff stands ready to receive any feedback that you have during the process, and the process will continue. And so the way we plan to continue that process is there is a QR code, a postcard in front of you on the dais. And this is your ticket to really, not only for yourself to provide more input into the process. We tried to make it as simple and easy as possible. There is a single website page that allows you to provide feedback. It could be any feedback. It could be feedback, you could be in your car, in congestion, thinking about, oh my God, this is something I really need. That you will have that opportunity to provide that feedback through this QR code at any time, at any point. This QR code, you can provide written feedback, you can provide voice feedback, you can actually do a mini Zoom session all by yourself and speak into a screen and actually give it to it in a video format. And there's also in there is a PowerPoint presentation in which you are welcome to use, borrow, in your communities as you're talking with folks. But there are tools in which we are using to do listening. And so you could be around the dinner table and talk to your families about what are your pain points, and you can have them record those into this website. This is our opportunity to go far and wide and really get into the community to really understand, again, what is going well, what are people's pain points, what are people looking for in transportation. And so that's really important to this phase of listening that we're in. This window will be open until probably fall. So wherever you can take this could be any group you're part of, wherever you're live in the community, could be your neighbors, could be, friends, could be folks at school, drop off or whatever. So this is just an ability for you to pass this along and get as much feedback as we possibly can. All the feedback is anonymous. But again, there's a way to do voice, text, and video feedback. So again, you are now all ambassadors, appointing you all. And again, we look forward to starting this journey with all of you. And I think this is my last slide. It is my last slide. So we look forward to starting this journey with you. And again, like I said, this will not be the last time you hear from me. This is a huge priority for me and for CCTA and for the authority board. This is probably the number one thing I spend most of my time on right now is this transportation expenditure plan. So, and she knows because she does my calendar. So So thank you for your time. Thank you for your feedback. I'm happy to answer any more questions or comments you may have. But again, the QR code is really your opportunity to provide any additional feedback that you may have.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim, for coming. I think this has been really great to share our feedback. We think about transportation a lot. We geek out. We're here because we enjoy, seeing, understanding what's happening in the county and putting our 2 cents in. There's a couple things that I've been thinking about in a new measure that you might consider as a useful tool to get out to reach to the public. Kind of a look back, some success metrics of Measure J. When I look at CCTA's website, there's, I don't know how many projects, many, thousands, I don't know. But there isn't really a good scorecard. How'd we do? How many are completed? How many are in process? What has this half-cent sales measure done? Which is extensive and it's amazing. And then, kind of the looking forward part. You've done this wonderful, CTP process and really organized, people's requests into really good categories. So looking at what those future projects might be and what's important to them, right? What's in it for me? If they could kind of quickly filter, categorize, okay, I'm interested in schools, I'm interested in this community, geography, and they could quickly identify, oh, this is actually going to impact me. Yes, I'll have my vote. So just a couple things I'd been thinking about how to make a big impact. Member Saunders, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have sort of 2 questions. The first one is, let's just assume this completely and utterly fails. You guys all lose your jobs. What are the consequences to Contra Costa County and transportation? Because I think there's a lot of people who go, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do that, and that's why, the vote goes the other way. But what's the argument for what happens with where we are today?
Yeah, I mean, both of you, Chair Lovejoy and Member Sanders, you're all starting to get into like really what we're calling the messaging part of this. And that is something that goes, maybe we're going to be talking about 2 years from now when we have a better understanding of what the actual expenditure plan looks like, But again, the listening phase is really intended to do these things. It's to help us get insights into how we message these things, right? And what is going to resonate, with the public, right? So to your point, Member Sanders, number one, we're not out of a job. So CCTA will continue to exist after 2034 if the measure is not successful and expires in 2034. I know that for a fact because there's a similar sister agency called the Solano Transportation Authority in Solano County that does not have a half-cent sales tax measure, and they do all the same things that we do. Maybe not as to the extent and scale of what we do, but they do similar things. They plan, fund, deliver projects and programs. And they primarily rely on federal formula dollars, state formula dollars, as well as regional dollars, right? So I'm happy to get more details if you want to learn more about that. But so the second part of your question in terms of what do you lose, it's an important question because yes, there is something to be lost if Measure J does not get extended. I'll highlight a few things. The programs is probably the most important. The programs that we have provide transit funding, so there would be probably significant cuts to transit in Contra Costa County if the measure fails. Particularly in South County, Traffics and the La Miranda School Bus Program will go away. Those 2 programs are 80% funded by local funds from Measure J. The other thing that also goes away is the return to source dollars, which is supporting paving in all of your local communities right now. So potholes, road maintenance, all of those things goes away. Trail maintenance also goes away. There's about 5% of East Bay Regional Park dollars that go directly to trail maintenance. The other thing that obviously goes away is there's no more construction or delivery of large capital projects, right? And so I can tell you that without Measure J, everyone's commutes would be at least 30 minutes longer without Measure J. We've had tremendous amount of growth in this county over the since 2004, when Measure J was passed, and we're continuing to project even more, continued growth in Contra Costa County. Maybe not as at the significant levels that we've had, particularly like in East County. Brentwood particularly has grown dramatically, right, over the last 15, 20 years. But we do anticipate a lot of growth. So congestion will get worse, right? We will be in gridlock without continued dollars for transportation programs and projects. So the other thing that we'll lose is transportation for seniors. So we offer travel training programs. We fund paratransit. We also fund a lot of programs to get people to their medical appointments, like Mobility Matters. All of that would go away. So there's a significant amount on the table to be lost if this measure is not successful.
And so I think that's a good summary, but I think part of the messaging, that obviously it has to happen. The other thing I worry about from this whole conversation is when you look at the first series of, the mega projects, the tunnel, Highway 4, if you now are going to the public with sort of 1,200 projects that are just very spread out.
That will not happen.
So how do you address that? Because I think people got the oh yeah, great, but how do you spread that word that those 1,200 projects maybe have equal or more impact to the 4 that were on the board?
Yeah, and maybe just give you like an order of magnitude here. So there's 12 billion of project need, right, in the county. So only this measure we have to do a revenue projection, but off the cuff, probably talking anywhere from roughly around 4 billion. So you're only going to fund 4 billion out of that 12 billion. So you're not going to put all 1,200. So this gets back to members Ash's question about like how we're going to actually, which projects get funded, how do we identify projects, how we do programs. So a big part of this is the listening phase that we're all in right now is is really learning, right, about those pain points and what those projects are, so that way we can better understand, where and how, which projects are really going to help benefit the folks that are out there in the community. I mean, this is why that connection to the community is so important right now, Now, in terms of like what we're calling signature projects, like projects that really resonate folks, like the fourth bore, the Caldecott Tunnel. I mean, everyone got that, right? Everyone voted yes on Measure J because of Caldecott. It was like, yes. By the way, Measure J got 72% of the vote, So it was very well supported. So we do feel like there are signature projects still left in Contra Costa County, right? I'll just give you a few examples, right? I think one big one is obviously 680. Right? I mean, that's a big project that needs to be solved, the bottleneck at 24. The other big project is going to be the Highway 4 eastbound in the afternoon, right? In Martinez and in Concord, that whole section. I mean, that project, that location alone was the only congested spot left when we were in shelter in place during the pandemic. It was still red. It was the only red spot in the county when we were in shelter in place. So, which tells you something. That tells you we have a lot of essential workers and people that live in East County. They're going to lots of different places, right? So we see that as obviously a significant project, right? But access to transit to Brentwood, right? Your project, I think that could be a signature project, right? So expansion of Highway 4 all the way out to Byron Highway and Byron Airport, Vasco Road safety improvements. In West County, San Pablo Avenue BRT, transit improvement projects. To your point about member pace, reliability of San Pablo Avenue and having reliable transit, San Pablo Avenue BRT. So we do think there are some pretty big projects. But again, this is the process in which we have to go through. We have to do the listening, understand people's pain points, take all of this information into consideration, and then and take that into how's that going to be part of the process in which we identify and come up with this framework of this transportation expenditure plan. And do it in a way that keeps it simple, right? So that way people can it can resonate and people are not confused or do not know what they're actually, how are they benefiting, from this measure. I know one of the other topics that's really important to the CCTA board right now is student transportation. So we think that student transportation could be something of a signature project. So seniors, we think senior transportation could be a signature project. It's not a capital project, but we know that our senior population is going to double, triple over the next 5 to 8 years. 15% of our population is over the age of 65, and that number is intended to double in the next 5 to 8 years. We're talking, out of 1.2 million people in Contra Costa County, we're talking roughly about 400,000 people over the age of 65 in the next 5 to 8 years. And I can tell you right now, we do not have the infrastructure in place to serve that population properly.
Tim, what's a rough number of the percentage of people that come through the Caldecott Tunnel that take 24 to 680 to 4 towards that East County? Is that a significant number of people taking that?
I don't have that percentage off the top of my head. Happy to get it. But yeah, I would, if you want something off the hip, unverified, unvalidated, a Tim Hale response.
Tim Hale response.
Tim Hale response.
We won't
Don't
quote
take
you.
it anywhere. Don't quote me. It's probably 30%.
Coming through the Caldecott Tunnel all the way to East County. So they're going 24 to 680 to 4.
I'd say 30%. I mean, I had this wild crackpot idea about developing a freeway within a freeway that starts at Caldecott Tunnel and goes all the way out to East County. So it would cost over $1 billion. But it'd be interesting to study it. So.
239, straight route, 239. That's
Yeah,
still
I mean,
part of-
239, we got to work on messaging on that. So, but yeah, I would say that expansion of Highway 4 to Vasco and to Byron Highway, it may not be called 239, but it would be improvements to Highway 4. So we're talking about improvements to Highway 4, the completion of the Balfour interchange. Just so you all know, we only built half of the interchange at Balfour. So half of the freeway, I forgot, half of the freeway. So if you go through Balfour, you actually are traveling on the westbound direction as you go through. So as you've got 8 lanes, right? And then they all transition and go to 4, right? So you got 2 lanes each direction. That's actually the westbound bridge. So we haven't built the eastbound bridge yet for Balfour. Balfour interchange, East County, way East County out in Brentwood.
The last exit.
It's literally the last interchange on Highway 4.
That's
So,
where I
but
live.
you know what I'm talking about, right?
That's where I live.
So
I live off
you've
Balfour.
got 8 lanes, right? And all these lanes start dropping off. So you have this lane drop, this lane drop, this lane drop, this, and essentially what happens is you've got these two lanes become these 2 lanes, these 2 lanes. So these are the 4 lanes that continue going out to East County. So when I say the completion of Highway 4 in Balfour, you build that eastbound bridge, And you're taking, I will say you're not taking 8 lanes all the way out the Byron Highway. You're probably taking 4 lanes. So, but you're taking 4 lanes all the way from Balfour. So you'll have an interchange at Marsh Creek and another interchange at Camino Diablo. There's another interchange I'm missing. Walnut. So you have 3 interchanges that go up there. And then that connects into Vasco, and then there's a brand new road called the Byron Highway Vasco Connector that goes from Camino Diablo, swings over and connects to Byron Highway, and bypasses Byron, just north of the airport. That's what we call the 239 project. So, yeah, we can come back and give you guys a presentation about that project. So.
We had some discussion with Matt,
Yeah.
I think, like a few months ago.
So, but yeah, I mean, to your point, Member Sanders, like, signature projects, what's resonating with the community, how do we find those projects? That's what this listening phase is all about. Any other questions or comments? You're all now ambassadors. Don't forget that. If you need, we have like thousands of these postcards. So if you want more postcards, we are happy to give you postcards. So just please email Matt and we can arrange getting them to you. But like, I can't say this enough. It cannot be me and CCTA be only one voice. To do this successfully, if we really want to make this happen, it has to be all of you and everyone else in the county. It has to be many voices to do this, to be successful. So 67% is very hard. Literally the stars have to be aligned. Everything has to be perfect. And that's going to take everyone and everyone's support to get this done. So,
Thank you so much, Tim. I think it was really fun to do the Menti, and we have a lot of ideas, and we're happy to share. And I think I can speak for myself and probably most of you that we're happy to be ambassadors as well. So thank you again.
starts with you. Go home and put all the input you can all think about into that website. It really starts with you first.
Okay, and with that, at this late hour, Emily, do we have any written or remote public comment?
We have no public comment, written or virtual.
So that concludes our regular agenda items. The next item on the agenda is member and staff comments. Do any committee members or staff have anything they would like to share? Member Carr.
I have a public service announcement. I was away last month in New Orleans, rented a car, happened to use a Metropolis parking lot, and then, to my surprise, when I'm back home on the 14th of May, I get a note, Metropolis, welcome to the Women's Hospital of Texas. So Metropolis somehow associated my name, probably through my phone, to my account on a rental car, and then started wanting to charge me. Now, I will give Metropolis credit that they did a good job. I sent them a copy of the rental agreement that showed it was over 3-4 weeks ago, and they immediately undid it and said, sorry for the trouble. But just to be aware, that caught me off guard. If you ever use a Metropolis facility anywhere, they may tag it to you, and then the rental car or whatever vehicle you're using, they'll start, somebody drives to a Metropolis facility, it starts, presuming it's you and charging you. So if you ever are using a rental car, go to a Metropolis facility anywhere in the country, make sure they don't associate your account here or that you've set up for the purposes of this meeting and start wanting to hit you with a bill. So just, that was a lesson, and I thought others might appreciate hearing that. Maybe something you want to let staff know if they use Metropolis here. So that's all.
Okay, good PSA. Anybody else?
Are you gonna ask for what things we want to be covered later? Is that the next one or the next agenda?
Well, actually, there's one for staff,
Yeah.
and then there's future.
Right, that's the next one. Any topics that members would like agendized?
Two things. One, I think it's time to get Bart in here. I think we've asked a number of times. I think it should go up on the priority list. As all this stuff comes, I'm interested in asking questions. Then the other thing, the Concord developments in the news, if we're truly gonna add 12,000 houses or whatever, I'm kind of interested in what that will do to transportation. So I'm not sure who presents that or how, but that just seemed interesting to me.
So like a housing growth.
Well, I think in particular, it's related to this project. What does building out that project over the next 15 years or whatever it is, it's a ways to start. What does it do to local transportation from BART buses, driving, all of that stuff? That's gotta have some impact.
So that's the Bollinger Canyon, Shadelands?
No, this
Are
is
you
the
talking
naval,
about
this is the
Shadelands?
naval station.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
And it would fall under Concord's purview.
okay.
I think, well, did you want to? I was going to say it's the Concord Naval Weapons Station. It's 30 to 35 residents, but it is 30 to 40 years in the making, with the first 5 to 10 years being infrastructure development, and the first set of non-commercial properties, which will actually be in the beginning, the residential properties will be lower income and closer to the North Concord BART station. So it will be a long time on their timetable before they get past that. But that will be very BART accessible and friendly, unless
Yeah.
they close that BART because we don't pass the transit measure, but that's a
Right.
different story.
I think the updated plan is that they'll have, I don't remember how many houses built before 2030 in Bunker City. I think
Yeah, I
that's
was just,
that.
so maybe just to connect the dots for you all. So basically, the growth management program, right? The growth management program requires that every city address traffic mitigation for development in their local jurisdiction. That's a requirement of the growth management program. This is a really good example of the surface transportation mitigation program requirement on jurisdictions in the GMP. So that would be the city of Concord. So the city of Concord, we've been coordinating with them and trying to better understand your point, Member Sanders, in terms of how do they plan to address traffic impacts from building 12,000 homes, and how is that going to impact, both local and regional transportation. So that is an ongoing conversation, So yeah, I think it would be something for you all, as your role in the Citizens Advisory Committee, as well as overseeing kind of the growth management program, and that would be the kind of the nexus between all of that.
Okay. Any other items to agendize? Okay, so our next regular meeting is proposed for May 27th, 2020. That is today. Emily, it would be June? That's okay. I was reading that and going, wait a second.
Chair, Chair, is it correct we have no meeting in August, November?
I do know that CCTA has adjournment during August, so.
Yes, so to correct the next meeting date first, it's May 24th. We are dark in, sorry, I did it, yes, June 24th, thank you. We are dark in August, so there's no meeting in August. And then because of Thanksgiving and the Christmas holiday, November and December are combined into one meeting. That will be on December, I believe, 9th, following week, December 9th, second Wednesday.
Okay, thank you for that, Emily.
So if, just to circle back around, so when he says we've got until the fall to be these drum majors for this parade, we essentially have only 2 more times that we're meeting in June and July to sort of say, here's how it's going in my neighborhood, so, right? Okay.
Correct.